This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 115 of Here's How for the 21st of January 2021. Fianna Fáil are back in power. Are they a new modern party that have left their old corrupt ways behind? And who will be in charge? Let's ask the young pretender.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
Coming up in a few minutes, I would expect someone like that who wants to be a leader to have a burning determination to wipe out that inequality. And I'm not hearing that burning from you, Jim.
I know, but William, the reason you're not hearing it is because you won't let me answer the question.
That's coming up shortly, but first, welcome back to the first Here's How podcast of 2021. And I know that some people were getting on to me to ask, when's the next podcast? Well, here it is now, and we have a few more in the pipeline, so hopefully they'll be coming at you thick and fast. Helping in that process, I have Kevin Wolf. He's a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Education and Health Sciences at UL, and now he's the new assistant producer for the podcast, so welcome to him. Also, I want to thank all of my Patreon donors. I really appreciate them all. Patreon is a website where people can donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month, and that helps me to give more time to research and finding interesting guests. If you think that you could do the same as those patrons and make a small regular donation, there's details on the website and at the end of the show. I want to talk about a coup attempt, a failed coup attempt. It was a ridiculous affair, viewed by some people as little short of comical, despite the fact that several people were killed. The coup attempt was carried out by a barely credible bunch of thugs who had a habit of dressing up in quasi-military uniforms and showing off their weapons in the streets. The intent was for them to storm government buildings to make sure that people who were theoretically their allies did what they wanted. The coup quickly fell apart when it became apparent that there was almost no plan for what to actually do once they had taken over those buildings, and many of the people involved were picked up by the authorities in the following days. The coup attempt attracted as much ridicule as anything else, but it did bring a crackpot, fringe, conspiratorial group to much wider attention in the country as a whole. But by that, I'm not referring to QAnon, and I'm not referring to the riot in the US Capitol at all. I'm referring to what is contemptuously referred to as the beer hall putsch by the then hardly known Nazi party led by Hitler in Munich in 1928. But the parallels are striking. The most striking parallel was how far short of credible the Nazis were viewed. They were literally a laughingstock and viewed by wealthy interests as useful idiots to keep left-wing forces at bay. They did manage to briefly hold hostage Gustav Ritter von Kahr, effectively the appointed governor of Bavaria, and his military and police chiefs, who were all far-right figures with leadership ambitions of their own, and the idea was to force them to endorse the coup and allow the Nazis take over Bavaria. But without planning, the entire thing fell apart within 24 hours. It's worth comparing that to the attack on the US Capitol. I think that the seriousness of that attack and how close it came to being vastly more serious is being understated. Mike Pence was literally seconds away from being captured by the mob.
As the mob chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," and a makeshift gallows went up, the vice president, his wife and daughter were just seconds away from being spotted, according to the Washington Post. At one point, they were hiding less than 100 feet from the violent crowd, attacking police officers, journalists, and others.
The CNN reporter there says makeshift gallows. Other sources have said mock gallows. I'm not sure that there's any difference at all between those and real gallows. And if Pence had been captured by the mob, I don't think that there's much doubt at all as to what would have been his fate. But that's a what if. In the end, both the attack on the US Capitol and the beer hall putsch were ignominious failures. What's interesting is what happened next. Hitler was arrested, tried and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He wrote Mein Kampf in the 8 months that he actually spent in a comfortable German jail. 5 years later, again trusted by wealthy right-wing establishment interests to be useful in resisting the left, Hitler was in power.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
The Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin Bay South is Jim O'Callaghan. He was re-elected last year, but he wasn't a wet week in the Dáil in 2016 when Micheál Martin put him in charge of negotiations for the confidence and supply arrangement between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. That was 5 years ago, and we had him on the podcast at the time, and I asked him this. I've been reading the programme for government and the agreement that you guys have with Fine Gael. I know you were involved in setting that up. Is Fianna Fáil in government or is it in opposition?
In opposition, we're not in government. What we entered into with Fine Gael was an arrangement, a confidence and supply arrangement in order to facilitate a Fine Gael-led minority government. So we're the main opposition party.
Jim, that was the last time you were on the podcast. You were quick to emphasise that you weren't in government then, but there's no denying that you're in government now. Are you delighted that Fianna Fáil have their feet under the cabinet table after nearly a decade in the wilderness?
Thanks very much, William, for inviting me back on the programme. And yeah, I am pleased that Fianna Fáil is back in government. I'm pleased that we have a Fianna Fáil Taoiseach. Obviously, Fianna Fáil hasn't been in government since 2011. It's been a long road back. But I suppose the objective of rebuilding the party since 2011 was for the purpose of trying to get our policies implemented. And the way you do that is by getting into government.
And you were offered a junior ministry, albeit a junior ministry, but one at, I think, the Department of Justice, which is one of the real junior ministries. It's got some power with it. Why did you turn it down?
Well, listen, it was a complicated issue. First of all, I suppose I had to consider where I could be most effective from the point of view of Fianna Fáil and indeed from the point of view of a potential government. My own view and my own assessment was that a junior ministry in the Department of Justice, a ministry for law reform, where no law reform proposals had been outlined, was a limited role. And I thought that I would be able to play a more significant political role by being outside government. And obviously there were concerns at the time in terms of protecting Fianna Fáil's identity. I thought it would be better off to have a senior backbencher outside of government who would seek to ensure as a priority that Fianna Fáil's identity was protected and that I could. What do
you mean by Fianna Fáil's identity?
Well, I think if you look back at the history of Fianna Fáil as to what it stands for, I think it's important that we re-emphasise repeatedly what it is we are as a party. We are a centre-ground, centre-left national party that wants to reunify our country, build public housing, reward hard work, save the environment, protect the vulnerable and preserve Irish heritage, culture and language. That's what we are about. And obviously, particularly at a time when there is a pandemic in the country, the Fianna Fáil ministers in government are going to be very much preoccupied with the running of the country in a three-party coalition at the time of a serious pandemic and serious issues for the country. So I think it is beneficial for the country that the identity of Fianna Fáil is protected, that we have strong individuals in the parliamentary party outside of government who speak up on behalf of Fianna Fáil and who are actively involved in trying to, I suppose, re-energise the party. And it's a calculation I made. On the one hand, I could have been a junior minister in the Department of Justice with no proposals set out for what law reform was going to be.
Okay, that's a reasonable objection. Yeah. But I just want, a lot of people will know you. Maybe not all of the listeners. We have a fairly wide demographic of listeners, and you are an extremely well-educated person. You're also a senior counsel. That's a very senior barrister. You studied in UCD. You studied in Cambridge. You studied in King's Inns. And maybe for the people who aren't so up on Fianna Fáil history and culture and so forth, can you explain what you understand is the meaning of the phrase rubber chicken circuit?
The rubber chicken circuit, my understanding, is an expression that was used back in the 1970s and 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in general associated with former leader of the party, Charles Haughey. And it was a description of him travelling around the country, meeting members of Fianna Fáil for the purpose of trying to re-energise the party at one level, and on the other level to promote his own leadership ambitions. That's my understanding.
Yeah, a lot of the people he met ended up being elected in the Fianna Fáil landslide in 77 and supported him.
Just for your listeners, the reason why it was called the rubber chicken circuit is because when he'd obviously go out to an event that there would be chicken served afterwards.
Not necessarily of the greatest quality. Is it possible that you're on a virtual rubber chicken circuit at the moment?
No, I don't see myself as being on any rubber chicken or any chicken circuit. But isn't what I
So you've no ambitions for leadership?
I never said that. You're asking me, am I on a rubber chicken circuit? What I've been asked to do in recent times, and other members of the Fianna Fáil Parliamentary Party are doing it as well. For instance, my own colleague Barry Andrews is going to address my own organisation by Zoom next Tuesday. But when members of the organisation or Corla Dáil counters in other parts of the country ask me to address them, as it can only be by Zoom meeting now, I'm happy to do that, and I'll facilitate anything that'll assist in strengthening Fianna Fáil.
Okay, I want to ask you a couple of things about Fianna Fáil and your relationship with Fianna Fáil and the party as it goes forward. But just one thing on international politics to begin with. I won't ask you if you support Scottish independence. I presume that you'd say that is a matter for the people of Scotland. But if you look at the polls there, it seems that it's a very significant possibility. Particularly the Scottish elections are coming up in a couple of months' time. Would you agree that this could be very destabilising for Ireland, particularly given that, the cultural attachment of unionists is more often to Scotland than it is to England?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and just the development of the Scottish independence movement is, very revealing as well. Like the Scottish National Party.
But as it relates specifically to Ireland, that could be a COVID-type situation where an issue apparently comes out of the blue and has massive implications for this country.
I agree with you. I think it will. And I've said before that one of the things that are going to promote the cause and campaign for Irish unification is going to be COVID, Brexit, but also Scottish independence. If the union, which has been there with Scotland since 1700, breaks up, that's a significant destabilising effect in the United Kingdom. Now, I don't know whether it's going to happen.
Of course it's going to be destabilising here as well, particularly with view to the north.
Well, I don't know to what extent. The primary destabilisation is going to be within the United Kingdom. You're going to be left, if that happens, you're going to have a United Kingdom of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, you're correct in stating that there was a strong link between Northern Ireland and Scotland. And with that link gone, I suspect the union with Northern Ireland will be weakened further.
Okay, I want to move on from that, and particularly your relationship with Fianna Fáil and the party's relationship with you. And I will note, you didn't say that you don't have leadership ambitions, and I won't press you anymore on that, but that's, I think, enough for most listeners to understand the situation. But I just want to look back at the time that you joined Fianna Fáil, the time that you were in college and so forth, and there'll be a lot of listeners who'll be your generation, but there'll be people who are younger than you as well. And, for example, 1989, Century Radio was set up when a group of businessmen essentially bribed your party colleague Ray Burke to get a licence. 1991 was the Beef Tribunal established. In 1995, Susan O'Keefe, the journalist who exposed that scandal, was the only person who was prosecuted in relation to it. You ran for the Seanad in 2002. That was the year that the Ansbacher report came out and that Liam Lawler was imprisoned. You ran in the locals in 2004, the year that Ray Burke was jailed for not paying tax on bribes that he had received. And you won a council seat in 2009. Congratulations on that belatedly. But that's the same year that on Primetime, I think a programme you're probably acquainted with, it revealed that Michael Fingleton had facilitated fast-track loans for people like Francis O'Brien, Don Lydon and Celia Larkin, Bertie Ahern's partner. In that period, and people of your generation and maybe a few years older and a few years younger, when they hear the culture and the heritage of Fianna Fáil, it feels to them like the culture and the heritage of Fianna Fáil is crime. Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't, William. I wouldn't agree with that. And obviously, you've gone back over 30 years in recounting details which are embarrassing in terms of the involvement of Fianna Fáil senior figures in those events. But look, I
Crimes.
think it is some of them were crimes. Some people were. You spoke about Ray Burke. He was subsequently convicted of a crime. There were crimes committed. There were crimes committed in respect of Ansbacher. But I think it is unfair to lay the blame for all of them at the feet of Fianna Fáil as an institution. Like, I don't deny the fact that there were people who were in Fianna Fáil, politicians, senior figures, who embarrassed the party, who damaged the party, and did a great disservice to the country as well in terms of the behaviour that you've outlined there. But I do think it's unfair to say that this was an issue unique to Fianna Fáil. And I also think, 30 years ago is a long time ago. If you look at the Democratic Party...
Well, Fianna Fáil didn't have a monopoly on this, but they were certainly major players in the cartel.
Well, there were acts of corruption which took place in Irish politics. You're absolutely right about that. And Fianna Fáil, as the largest party at that time, was involved in them. But
could it happen now?
No, I don't believe so. I don't believe it could. I don't believe it could happen now, because I just think that the type of corruption that took place back 20, 30 years ago is not feasible now. And I've worked on...
Okay, pause on that idea for a minute.
Just let me finish this point. I've been a member of Dublin City Council, as you said, from 2009 to 2016. You identified one of the big areas of corruption in Irish political life was in local authorities. I never saw any suggestion of it whilst I was on Dublin City Council.
Okay, and you talk about that being in the past and so forth, and that's certainly a point that people will make. But I just want to go right up to the present. In the past week or so, your colleague in the Dáil, Darragh O'Brien, who is the Minister for Housing, Fianna Fáil Minister for Housing, said, and this is a direct quote from a statement he put out, that he wanted to put the dream of home ownership back into reach, and this scheme, that's to say a shared equity scheme costing the taxpayer €75 million, will be able to help to bridge the gap and get thousands more on the property ladder. As you see it, is that statement true or false?
Well, first of all, obviously, I don't think we should be, and I don't think you are trying to link what Darragh said and the proposal in respect of...
No, I'm not, but I want you to focus on that statement. He said this shared equity scheme set up in the budget with €75 million budget, that this scheme will help to bridge the gap and get thousands more on the property ladder. Now, that's either the truth or a lie. Which do you see it?
Well, listen, I don't go around assessing statements as being this is the truth or this is a lie.
Well, is it true or false?
Well, I believe it is true. He believes that it is going to improve the opportunity of people getting onto the property ladder. And there's a huge number of people who are desperate to get onto the property ladder, who have aspirations to own a home. And if you look at it at present, sometimes it's extremely difficult for people who Darragh's trying to facilitate here, people who, earn more than...
Everybody knows how hard it is.
William,
Go ahead.
William, let me finish the point. In terms of there is a huge number of people who earn too much to qualify for a local authority social housing, and then who don't earn enough to get mortgages from banks. So this is something that's going to facilitate them, by the state taking a share in the equity of the house. It will enable them to try to reach that aspiration of owning their own house, and I think it will facilitate them in getting their foot on the ladder.
Okay, hold that thought, because I want to go and courtesy of the business class in Coláiste na Mí in Navan in County Meath. They've actually got up on their website some videos. I think it's originally from the ECB, but this is some learning material targeted at the junior cert business students in Navan there.
What would you like?
2, please.
That's not enough.
You've increased the price. Why's that?
Because people have more to spend than there are goods to buy, the demand for my cakes has risen. And the price of flour has gone up. I have to pay the miller. And the price of wood for my oven has gone up too.
Well then, you'd better have more money.
Wait a second. I know you. You're inflation.
Well done. Because you're so clever, I'm going to give everyone here a cash prize.
No, don't! If there's too much money around for the same number of products, it pushes up prices and money loses its value.
Jim, that's, as I said, from a junior cert course in business. It doesn't take a genius, though, to work out, and I'm sure we have some geniuses doing the junior cert there, it doesn't take a genius to work out that if you have an increased amount of money chasing a fixed amount of goods or services, that the price goes up and nobody gets anything extra, and no extra houses are built. Nobody extra is on the housing ladder that would otherwise not have been on the housing ladder. All that happens is more money goes to the developers.
Well, I don't agree with that, and I think if you were just to look at it as though the only policy that exists in respect of housing is Darrag's affordable housing scheme, I think you may be able to make an argument in respect to that, but that's not the case.
But for every house that's bought under that scheme, somebody else can't buy that house outside of that scheme. The number of houses is identical.
I know, but the purpose of it is to try to facilitate people to purchase houses that they can't purchase at present, and the benefit.
But the house wouldn't have lain empty if they hadn't bought it. Somebody else would have bought it.
But it's also the case for him. We need to increase supply of housing as well, and if you do increase supply, that's going to be the real determiner of ensuring that prices come down. Like the big problem here we have. Like let's just try.
But that runs counter to the most basic of economic theory. Supply and demand.
I know, we obviously we need to increase supply of housing. That's something that's absolutely fundamental.
Okay, can I just give you a couple of facts here? Because Owen O'Brien of Sinn Féin did an FOI request, and he got information about no less than 4 occasions when Darragh O'Brien was warned in writing that, and I'll give them very, very briefly, the Department of Public Expenditure wrote to him warning that this shared equity scheme is a demand-side measure which is unnecessary in a market like ours, which is chronically undersupplied. And just a couple of days after that, another official in the Department of Public Expenditure said that the Department of Finance and the Department of Housing have spoken to the banks and developers who apparently suggest this will unlock supply. And their opinion, that's to say the civil servants' official opinion, people who've studied this, said, we think this will push up prices in a supply-constrained environment, most likely at a time when prices are starting to rise anyway. And the Secretary General of the Department of Public Enterprise, Robert Watt, wrote to Darragh O'Brien's department saying the property industry want an equity scheme because it will increase prices.
Well, can I just say to you...
Do you think they're all wrong?
I haven't looked at that correspondence and I will look at it, but can I say to you, if it does have the effect of increasing prices as a result of this, it's a scheme that's not going to work and shouldn't be supported.
Hey, hold on for 1 second. That depends on how you define work. Because if your goal is to increase the profits of developers, which hold on for a second. You were on Dublin City Council and you came in maybe not in the thick of it, but at a point when there were plenty of Dublin City councillors who beat their breasts and said that they supported this development, building a housing estate on a floodplain, or a dozen, or actually hundreds of other inappropriate developments. And when the information was revealed, it became very obvious, for example, in the Mahon Tribunal, that Frank Dunlop had kept a stash of cash in his house for the express purpose of bribing your colleagues on Dublin City Council on a regular basis. And I'm not saying that's going on at the moment, but you have to admit that when the officials in the departments are all ringing bells and sounding alarms and flashing lights saying don't do this because it won't build any more houses but it will jack up the prices. It really doesn't, it's not a good look, is it?
Yeah, can I just say this to you? I think it's unfair, William, to try to link the proposal that has been put forward by Darragh O'Brien with acts of corruption that were perpetrated by Frank Dunlop and other councillors. They were never colleagues of mine because it was far before 2009, I can assure you, on Dublin County Council and Dublin Corporation at the time, back in the, I think it was the 70s and the 80s.
Oh, okay, look at this, okay. but no, Jim, look at this from a regular person's point of view. Fianna Fáil is a party that has a history of corruption, particularly in planning and building. Especially in planning and building. And now we have department officials, which they didn't need because, as I said, junior cert economics students are able to make the same point and understand it, but he's got departmental officials ringing bells and sounding alarms saying don't do this because this is pumping more money into an already overly inflated market, and of course it won't build a single extra house. You can see how that any voter would say, this looks like you're back to your old tricks.
Listen, I think that's a very unfair assessment by you. Like, you're perfectly entitled to refer to acts of corruption that were outlined in the Mahon report, the flood report, in terms of what happened with rezoning and property development in Dublin back in the 70s, 80s and 90s, and they're in those reports. Perfectly entitled to refer to that. However, the fact that civil servants have written objections and concerns about the scheme that's been proposed by Darragh O'Brien should not be linked with that, and I think it's unfair to do so, William. Listen, the big issue, if we want to talk about resolving the chronic housing crisis in this country, what we have to recognise is that we have to increase supply. And I listened to the points you made there. You said this is a demand-side measure. I hope it won't turn out to be. But listen, can we talk about in terms of how we can try to improve the opportunity for young people even further?
Oh, I'll tell you one way. I'll tell you one way that all economists agree would improve that. I'll get you to comment on this one.
I know, but you're interviewing yourself now, William.
Go ahead then, Jim.
I was about to make a point.
Go ahead, briefly.
Obviously, Darragh is trying to bring forward an affordable housing scheme. My own view is I hope that succeeds. However, I do not believe that we are really going to ever be able to significantly get the price of houses down unless we tackle the price of land and development land. And this was a proposal that was put forward years ago in the Kenny report. And I think what we need to do is we need to amend Article 44 of the Constitution. I remember I gave advice in respect to this matter before. I believe it can be done. Some people state that the proposals in the Kenny report are constitutional. However, I think it would be much more beneficial if we had a referendum on it. And what we would seek to do is to put a provision into the Constitution, Article 44, that would say something like, the state may designate it undeveloped land to be used for the construction and development of housing in the interest of the common good, and the state could acquire that land at a price equivalent to the average price of agricultural land prevailing in the state.
Okay, that's essentially
like
implementing the Kenny report.
Yeah.
Another, and that certainly sounds like a good idea. Fianna Fáil have been in government for many, many of the years since that Kenny report, when you and I were children, was issued. But another thing you could do is just transfer a chunk of the tax base from income over to property.
Say that to me again, William. I'm sorry, I missed that.
We in the OECD are absolutely unique in that we get almost the whole of our tax from current taxation. That's to say, tax on income, VAT, tax on businesses, and almost nothing. It's almost irrelevant the amount of tax we tax on property.
Well, I was speaking last night to a friend in New York. I was speaking to him yesterday, and he told me that his property tax, and he lived in he said it was a modest house out in New Jersey. His property tax per annum is $25,000. Okay, so you're right in respect to that, but I suppose, listen,
to be clear, I'm not advocating increasing taxes. I'm advocating to have a revenue neutral switch away from taxing income and towards taxing property. Is that something? I'm not going to spend a long time on this, but is that something in general you would approve of?
No, we have a property tax in place at present, but if the objective here, that the purpose of our conversation just at this point is about trying to resolve the ongoing housing crisis in this country, and the only way we're going to achieve that is through producing more houses, supply more at lower rates. And I put forward the proposal about the Kenny report. In terms of the proposal you've put forward, how will that increase supply of housing?
Because in any economy, if one sector of the economy is taxed and another sector of the economy is untaxed, it is natural that people will invest their money and their energy and their talent and their ingenuity in the untaxed area. And in Ireland, property speculation is basically tax-free. If you're working in McDonald's and you do an hour's overtime, you will pay a higher rate of tax than somebody who is speculating on land and making millions on that.
But you have to pay tax on any income that's generated.
But you don't have to. Yeah, but hold on for a second. 8 landowners, 8, own the vast bulk of housing land, of vacant housing land in Dublin, and they don't need to sell it because they can simply finance other investments against it, and they drip feed tiny amounts of housing land onto the market.
I agree with you. When you look at rezoned land, that it is ridiculous that you could own a field, and as a result of a decision made by a local authority, the value of that field will increase 6, 7-fold. And I think
or
we
20.
need to recognize we need to recognize that housing is an absolutely essential national form of infrastructure, and that the state should be given power to purchase. If the state could purchase land at agricultural value and say that's dead for the purpose of housing development, it would transform the whole issue in terms of cost. It'd be
I'm glad we agree on that, but I want to move on to another topic, because you're a senior counsel, and that's basically one of the most senior types of lawyers. What you do is you appear in court, and I know that mostly you appear in civil cases, but you'll be familiar with the criminal system in this country. And you talked about the values of Fianna Fáil and Republican values and so forth. And I would have thought that one of the most important ones of those are equality. Would you agree that in Ireland there's a certain class of people who are chronically under-prosecuted?
Well, for what crime?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples, but it appears to me, and you don't have to be long on social media, and you wouldn't want to spend long on social media anyway, but you don't have to be long for people to point out vast disparities. And I'll give you a couple, but maybe you just start out by saying what you explain, because you're a barrister and I'm not. What does perverting the course of justice mean?
Well, perverting the courts, first of all, I'm not a criminal barrister. Perverting the course of justice is doing something such as interfering with a witness who's giving evidence in a trial, or trying to stop a prosecution from taking place.
If I were to summarise it as doing anything that would tend to make a court case go one way when it should have gone another, that would be perverting the course of justice. And
well, not necessarily. Like lawyers in court cases all the time try to make cases go one way rather than
yes,
another.
of course, illegitimately doing so, interfering with evidence, interfering with witnesses and so forth. Yeah. And up to recently in Ireland, this was a common law offence, so it was just understood as an offence, and that's the case in England. It has been codified in law in Ireland, but the offence hasn't really been changed. And there are some cases in Ireland that are just astonishing when put in contrast with cases in the UK. And the one I would draw attention to in the UK was of Chris Huhne. Chris Huhne was the former deputy leader of the Liberal Democrats.
I'm aware of him, He went to jail, actually, for getting his wife to claim she was driving his car.
Exactly, for 2 penalty points. And what happened was he was close to the limit on the penalty points. His wife signed that she was driving the car when they were speeding and not him. That came out in a messy divorce. He went from Her Majesty's government, from being a cabinet minister, to Her Majesty's prison in Wandsworth because of that. And when you compare that to the penalty point scandal in Ireland, where we had an industrial scale of Gardaí cancelling penalty points, and many Gardaí doing it, but a small coterie of Gardaí, apparently, if you look at the computer records, doing almost nothing else. All day long, they were cancelling penalty points from all over the country that had no connection to their area that they were serving in. And continuing to do so when they were explicitly instructed by the then Garda Commissioner, Noreen O'Sullivan, to stop. Nobody was arrested. Nobody was questioned. Nobody was charged. And this was over many tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of penalty points. And I'll give you a couple of other examples. And I mentioned Ray Burke before, and maybe I'm going too hard on him, because he was bribed by Oliver Barry for the Century Radio licence. And a High Court judge found, as a matter of fact, that Oliver Barry had bribed Ray Burke, and Ray Burke was sent to prison for not paying tax on the bribe, which I'm sure he was a bit sore about, because Oliver Barry was never arrested, never questioned, let alone prosecuted or convicted for bribing a politician. And we had Cardinal Sean Brady, who admitted on the media that he essentially manipulated 2 14-year-old rape victims, 2 young boys who had been raped by Father Brendan Smith, into signing an oath that they would never say anything about the crime that had been committed against them, which obviously precluded them from reporting it to the Gardaí. Which to me seems to fit the definition of perverting the course of justice. And it should be noted that after that incident, where Cardinal Sean Brady essentially covered up what Father Brendan Smith did, Father Brendan Smith continued raping children for a further 18 years. Cardinal Sean Brady was never arrested, never charged, never questioned. And your Fine Gael colleague in the Dáil, Maria Bailey, she launched a legal claim, part of which was to say that after she fell when she was drunk in a hotel, she was in such pain that she could not run at all for 3 months after that incident. And in fact, she was photographed holding up her medal, having completed a 10k run a couple of weeks later. And it seems to me that there's a whole class of people at the top of business and politics and the church in Ireland. They just don't do prison. They just don't do the law. And it seems that the prosecution authorities take it that it would be almost impolite to ask them to comply with the law, or indeed to punish them when they don't. Do you see that makes ordinary people in Ireland hugely angry?
Listen, you've made a lot of points there, okay?
But there's one central point, which is that some people don't get prosecuted even when their crimes are reported and verified in public.
Listen, there's no doubt about that. Some people don't get prosecuted, but would you let me finish now? Some
Go
people
ahead.
don't get prosecuted, and that is unfortunate, but I do not believe that there is a conspiracy there to protect people at the top.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the financial crisis from 2008 to 2010, Ireland is one of the few countries in the world who prosecuted, convicted, and imprisoned bankers for their role in that collapse. Like, very few other countries did it. We did it. Iceland did it. Very few other countries.
Which bankers went to prison in Ireland?
There's David Drum is in prison at present. I don't think he's at prison at present, but he's started prison. There was about 6 bankers who were convicted and imprisoned in Ireland. Okay, like, in terms of what you say about the commission of criminal offences, William, I gave you. It's like,
Go ahead.
If criminal offences are committed, people need to make a complaint about the commission of the offence. The Gardaí are then required to investigate it, and the DPP, an independent body, then makes the decision as to whether or not to prosecute. I do not believe it is the case, from my experience of being involved in law and politics, that decisions are made not to prosecute people because they're politicians or they're members of the church. If anything,
I agree, Jim. I agree. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I think that there's just at the top of Irish society that you don't go after your own.
No, I disagree with that.
Oh, okay. Well, let me contrast two things. Two things. Jonathan Aitken, who was another British politician, he sued the Guardian.
Like all these points.
I want to make this one. No, I want to make this one specifically, Jim. I want to make this one specifically because the parallel is so close. Okay. Jonathan Aitken sued the Guardian over a story exposing his corruption, and he denied it. That case never went to court because while they were investigating it, the Guardian's lawyers came up with evidence which rebutted his alibi. So it never went to court. He had just begun legal proceedings against the Guardian in which he had lied about an alibi. Jonathan Aitken was booted out of the Conservative Party, was prosecuted, and went to prison for perverting the course of justice. And that situation, as far as I can see, is absolutely analogous with Maria Bailey. She didn't get into court with her claim, but she launched a legal action in which she lied in an effort to increase the damages that she might receive. And she lied, saying that she had been unable to run at all for 3 months after the alleged incident. Those two are absolutely parallel. And Jim, I know that there can be problems with evidence and that every case is unique and so forth. But I would be willing to bet dollars to donuts that Maria Bailey was never arrested or questioned. We know that. But I would bet that there was never a Guardian's investigation. I bet if you went on Pulse, there isn't even a Pulse number for that criminal file because it was never brought up. And people in Ireland are angry at that. And I'm wondering, do you have a plan to change that? Or do you think that can just toddle along and keep going like that?
Well, listen, first of all, I don't know the circumstances of what the Gardaí are doing, if anything, in respect of Maria Bailey. Like, you've made serious allegations against her there. I do not know.
I haven't made allegations. It's public record.
I'm just saying, I don't know whether there's an ongoing investigation in respect of it. However, if perjury is committed or if an untruthful statement was made in a verifying affidavit grounding her claim, that's a criminal offence if that happened. Mm-hmm. In terms of Jonathan Aitken, like, just so as your listeners are aware, that Jonathan Aitken issue was like back in the 1980s, I think it was.
Yeah, but he was pretty swiftly convicted.
I know, but sorry, it was an elaborate fraud that he perpetrated by getting a hotel in Paris to suggest that he was not staying there at the time.
Correct.
Isn't that correct? He went into the witness box. He swore under oath.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. No, it never went to court.
Are you sure about that?
Yes, it was only in the documents that he had submitted, the statements he made to his lawyer, and that were submitted as part of the case. And that's the point, that he never went to court, so he wasn't charged with perjury.
Listen, where we'll agree on this, I think we have been too lax in this country in terms of dealing with people who make claims before courts which are perjurious or which are exaggerated. And traditionally, all that happens is that the case is thrown out and they lose the case, and maybe they get an award of costs against them. We need to be much more vigorous about that. I'm pleased to say the government is bringing in a new perjury act that will deal with that issue. But you're right. But
what good, Jim, hold on for a second. What good is a perjury act where we have Oliver Barry, where a High Court judge found as fact that he had bribed a government minister, a cabinet minister? He's not arrested. He's not charged. Nothing happens.
I know, but William, you got to be fair to me. I'm not aware of the Garda investigation in respect to that matter.
Well, neither is Oliver Barry, because he was never arrested. I'm sure it would have been publicly reported if he had been arrested.
Well, all I know is that the Gardaí will investigate issues and they make a determination as to whether or not to send a file to the DPP or not.
But how could they investigate it if they didn't even bring him in and ask him for a statement?
I don't. You're asking me about a complaint that was made and an investigation that took place 20 years ago. I don't know nothing about it. But William,
the cases I give you over. Hold on for Jim, because I'm not letting you escape from this one. The cases that I've given you, actually, this was 30 years ago with Oliver Barry, and the cases that I've given you are across the span of the last 30 years, up to very recently with Maria Bailey. And the point is that it appears to the average Irish person that prison is for drug addicts who snatch a handbag, or for a single mother who can't pay a TV license, and that there's a whole class of Irish people that can commit crimes in full public view, and the Gardaí just aren't interested.
Well, I think you're correct in identifying that white-collar crime was not taken seriously enough in this country, say 20, 30 years ago, and that was the case
or last year
in other countries as well. No, I disagree with that now. I think it is taken extremely seriously here. I think the Gardaí investigated much more vigorously. If there's
okay, hold with that. Go ahead.
If there's sufficient evidence, people will be prosecuted in respect of it. And listen,
But Jim, no, Jim, hold on for a second. If there's sufficient evidence, but if they don't even, if what on the face of it appears to be really quite a serious crime is being reported on the front page of the newspapers, and the Gardaí aren't even interested enough to open a file and bring somebody in for questioning.
But I don't know if that's the case. I would have thought if a complaint was made to the Gardaí about the Oliver Barry bribe, which you described it as, that would have been
which a High Court judge described it as.
But can I say this to you, William? Like, what we can't have as a situation is where politicians can start dictating who should be investigated, who should be prosecuted, who should be brought before the court.
Which is why I asked you, do you think there's a class of people in Ireland who don't do prison?
Well, the reality is, unfortunately...
Jim, you want to be a political leader. Jim, you want to be a leader. No, because I want to put this question. Jim, you want to be a political leader, and do you think that that's an adequate thing for a problem that I think a huge proportion of Irish people see as a huge problem of inequality in Ireland? I would expect someone who says, like you, that you have Republican values and so forth. I would expect someone like that who wants to be a leader to have a burning determination to wipe out that inequality. And I'm not hearing that burning from you, Jim.
I know, but William, the reason you're not hearing it is because you won't let me answer the question.
Go ahead.
You asked me, did I think there was a class of people who are just left in Irish prisons? And when you look at an analysis of people who are imprisoned in Mountjoy or other prisons, unfortunately, it is the case that huge numbers of them come from very disadvantaged backgrounds. And I think we need to recognise that. Now, I don't think the solution to that is that we have to now get an equal number of people from advantaged backgrounds.
No, but if advantaged people commit crimes, surely at least it would have been just to arrest, for example, Oliver Barry 30 years ago, Maria Bailey a year or two ago, and bring them in and put questions to them to it.
Like, the Gardaí do arrest and do investigate white-collar crimes, and they do investigate and arrest and charge people from what I've described as advantaged background. Now, it is clearly the case that the preponderance...
And do you think that's adequate?
No, would you let me answer the question? It is clearly the case that the preponderance of people in our prisons are from poorer backgrounds, and they are there not because they're some way more criminal than people from other backgrounds. It's because of the circumstances that they have been met with. And we have to seek to resolve that, to ensure that the devastation that drugs creates in our poor societies, that we tackle that and we ensure that we don't have this inequality in prisons. But the solution isn't to fill our prisons up with more people.
Well, surely it should be to send people who've committed serious crimes who are very advantaged to prison.
But sorry, if they have committed serious crimes, of course they should be sent to prison if they've committed
And that's
serious
not
crimes.
happening.
But the investigations are ongoing by Gardaí.
No, they're not. We've been told the Flood Tribunal was started up in the mid-90s, and we still have Gardaí saying, they're waiting for directions from the DPP as to whether they should prosecute.
I don't know issues like that. I don't think it's a good idea for politicians to be getting involved in trying to direct Gardaí as to what they should investigate.
Absolutely, I agree entirely. That's entirely correct. Politicians should not get into the nitty-gritty of each individual cases. But it seems to me that they should get into the nitty-gritty of making sure that the policy is that being an high up, as you put it, advantaged member of society doesn't get you off the hook. And I have to be honest, Jim, I don't hear a burning determination. I can give you case after case. I have a list of them here of cases where advantaged people walked away without even being arrested and there being very good information in the public domain that they committed a crime.
Well, you're not mentioning the bankers who went to jail in Ireland. You're not mentioning them.
I think the great majority of them didn't.
Well, of course, the great majority of bankers didn't go to jail, but we were one of the few
and Bertie Ahern starved the office of corporate.
We were one of the few countries in the world who did prosecute and convict and imprison bankers, and I think that is a singular achievement in terms of our response to the financial crash.
Jim O'Callaghan, Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin Bay South. We're way over time, but thank you very much, and you're very good at debating. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show. And while you're there, you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and follow Jim O'Callaghan at O'Callaghan Jim. And you can get in touch with me if you can suggest a guest or a topic for the next show. And thanks again to all of the patrons on Patreon. Their donations allow me to devote time to research and finding interesting guests. And if you'd like to do the same as them and donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month, please go to patreon.com/here'show. That link is on the website. Also there you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone or by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The assistant producer is Kevin Wolf, and thank you for listening.